People are so shocked when they hear these stories of a lot of the men who are sexually compulsive. But I gotta admit, I'm one of those people that's really not that shocked at all. When we look back at human behavior, a lot of people look at the way someone acts and they say that these actions are the sign of this person's character. And I just disagree with that. I don't think that humans' actions are a reflection of their character or their authentic self. I think our behaviors and the actions that we choose are heavily influenced by our environment, our mentors, our parents, the social crowd that you either belong to or that you aspire to belong to. I think that it has a tremendous effect. You know, as humans, we're hardwired to connect. And so the outside environment is extremely important to us. If we don't learn how to interact with people or belong to the social tribe that we feel compelled to belong to, that's a threat to our existence, right? And so again, I don't think that our actions are actually a true reflection of our character or our authentic self. I think they're a byproduct of our environment, how we're raised, childhood traumas, friend crowds, mentors, television, internet, things that we're consuming, right? So when people are so shocked and appalled by the behaviors that these guys have engaged in, again, I think if we zoom back out, I don't see why everyone's so shocked. To me, I'm actually shocked that the numbers are so low. You know, they say that it's between 12 and 18% of men who are either sexually addicted or compulsive. But then there's a much higher number, up in the 60%, depending on what study you look at, that shows 60% of men who are not sex addicts and not sexually compulsive, or maybe they are, but just total population of men, 60% of them are engaging in deceptive sexual practices, which means they are hiding or concealing some portion of their sexuality from their spouse or partner, which is a very, very high number. And we're talking about hundreds of millions, right? We're talking about a very big portion of the global population here. And again, I don't think that we should be that appalled. I mean, when we look at the access to pornography and at which age kids are be able to access it, we know that young men are going to be attracted to this. It's human biology. It's in our DNA. They're going to enjoy these images. They're going to enjoy these videos, right? So really, who's to blame there is us, right? We should have never allowed that to become legally practiced on the internet. We should have seen the impact of that. But again, there's a lot more subtle ones that I don't think people are really picking up on. You know, the concept of the cheerleader. You know, the cheerleader back in, the 1950s, 60s, 70s, their outfits were quite wholesome. Now, when you turn on an NFL game, there's cleavage. Now they're not wearing those thick covering shorts. They're now wearing revealing underwear that exposes a lot more of their butt than it ever used to. But then let's go even more subtle, right? Down to like video games. I don't know how many of you have heard of Grand Theft Auto. It is one of the top video games out there amongst all age groups, adults, teenagers, even young men. I remember when I first bought Grand Theft Auto, I think I was around 12 years old, something like that. And in Grand Theft Auto, you can hire prostitutes and they take your money and they get in your car, and then they insinuate that the character you're playing is sleeping with prostitutes. There's all these examples just in everyday life of the sexualized female. The one that I speak about the most often is for successful men, among successful male circles. Women are often seen as trophies to be conquered, and that is how they are spoken about there. And this just isn't just in the film industry, right? This is happening in real life, where women are talked about as placed on this hierarchy, and the ones towards the top of the hierarchy are the ones that men are supposed to be able to get. And if the men can get them, then it's an indicator that you are attractive, accomplished, suave, good with women, whatever. Again, when we look culturally, I don't see why people are so shocked and surprised that men are struggling with these behaviors just because they got married, right? So you think that you're going to get married and these are just going to go away? that men spend, the first 25, 30, 35 years of their life subscribing to all of these different beliefs and also being exposed to the hypersexualized female, being displayed as something that is rare and coveted. And you think that's just going to vanish from your life? My point of all of this is, as we're thinking about treatment, again, I think the field zooms in way too close. I think they focus on stuff that, to me, I don't even think is really that big of an issue, right? That men are using pornography as a coping mechanism for negative emotions. I really don't think that is that true. That men are, Patrick Carnes says that they, one of the category qualifiers of being a sex addict is that you believe you're inherently a bad or worthless person. That might be the case for some men, and the guys in my groups are high achievers and successful entrepreneurs. I don't think any of them ever thought that they were a bad or worthless person a day in their life. They've always believed in themselves. It's the reason they're so successful. And so I think there's this concept of, in the sex and porn addiction field, that it is this coping mechanism, that it has to do with these intimacy disorders and men who cannot connect. And I agree actually with all that. As a recovering addict myself, I will tell you right now, I absolutely have issues with human connection. I absolutely have issues with intimacy. I have kind of a messed up relationship with sex because of my overly religious upbringing. And so I'm not saying that none of these things aren't true. They certainly are. I just think that's just one aspect, that your inability to connect, yes, that tees you up to do a lot of these behaviors. But again, I think when we're looking at an addiction like this, which is a process addiction, that's what sex addiction is classified as, you need to examine all of the brain processes that contribute to the behavior. And I think it's very, very naive to just say that, oh, men are doing this as a coping mechanism or as some kind of maladaptive way to connect. I do not think that's accurate. I think that culturally, men have been groomed to, A, not see anything really wrong with these behaviors, because since they were in middle school, all of their friends were watching porn and masturbating, right? So I think it's been normalized. So their moral compass is become altered or deactivated. They're no longer feeling guilt at all. Usually when they're confronted with this, a lot of times they're like, what do you mean? There's no big deal with porn, right? Because they just think, oh, well, you're a woman, so you don't understand what it's like to be a guy, right? And you've always all heard that before, but it's not just limited to the normalization of pornography. I think we live in a culture where both men and women participate in the kind of the image and ideal of the attractive female, and women want to be that female and men want to get that female. They both kind of want to get it for the same exact reason, right? Men want to get it because, again, it indicates that they are successful, accomplished, good with women, superior to other men. And then women want to be that woman because it feels good for them to be wanted by the cream of the crop or the most successful, accomplished men, right? It feels good when the hardest to get men are finding you attractive because, again, similar to females, they're getting a really similar hit from that, right? It's an indicator that they must be more attractive or superior or special or unique. So my point of all of this just is, I think if we zoom in too much and we focus on childhood trauma, maladaptive coping mechanisms, just zoom way too much in on the sex and the porn, I think we miss the entire picture, which is there are cultural aspects to this that are positioning men to engage in these behaviors. And frankly, I don't think they really feel like they're doing anything wrong. I think women value protecting the sexual container. I think that's something that women are kind of brought up as, and that's, they want to preserve the sexual energy for the marriage. Well, I think men actually would like that idea. I know I came around to the idea when my wife and I got into recovery. I don't think that was where I was coming from initially, though. If I really examine my belief system, I think I do not value preserving the sexual energy for just my wife and I. To me, I was like, well, I'm just going to get sexual energy and stimulation wherever I want because my sexuality is mine. And I don't necessarily think there's actually anything wrong with believing that. I just think that if you're going to be in a monogamous, committed relationship, there could potentially be some trouble there, because if you're not upfront with this with your wife, then you are going to potentially have to lie to her to be able to engage in some of these practices. And that's where things go wrong, right? Where you do not have the right in a committed relationship to withhold life-altering information from your partner. Dr. Mwala calls that integrity abuse, and I totally agree with that withholding life-altering information when you know the person would leave you or have a reaction, so you're going to intentionally lie so that they don't leave you and they don't have that reaction, right? That's not right. And so my point of all of this discussion is, when we're going to look at the treatment, do not zoom in too close onto the behaviors, because I really don't believe that this is about sex, at least for high-achieving males and successful men. I think rather than this being an escape, which it is for a lot of guys, I think for successful men, it's a means to prove oneself. It's a means to feel ways that you want to feel, right? Getting attention, getting validation, feeling wanted, feeling desired, feeling superior, feeling chosen. These are attractive things to successful men. These are things that we try to get in all areas of our life, not just sex, but in business and our interactions with our community. And so again, I think zooming in too much on this and making it too much about sex and porn, I think that's why guys are relapsing. I really do. I think that is why guys are not getting truly be sober. I think when we really look at the recipe of why all of this happens, it's really not that bizarre and mysterious. It actually makes quite a bit of sense given the cultural brainwashing that we have kind of perpetuated in Western culture and successful male circles.